This week, James Jardine joins us from Jardine Software. In our section that just closed on me, Startup Articles and Discussion, Don't Play with Dead Snakes, Intellectual Property 101, the Uber Waymo lawsuit, 17 examples of fabulous explainer videos, invisible unicorns, and the hells of being a founder. In the startup security notes of interest, Cloudflare, Trend Micro, Palo Alto, Upstream, Auth0, Sumo Logic, Symantec, Zscaler, and that's pretty much it. I want to talk about also a great show that I started watching, $1 Million Genius, and talk about some of the lessons that I learned from this show and that show and kind of blended them together. It's going to be fun. On to this episode of Startup Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. Stream over 2,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video content live and on demand. Premium annual memberships include all video content, as well as access to virtual labs and the Q&A forums. You'd pay $85.70 a month or $857 per year, but we have a special offer for our listeners. For a free 7-day trial and 30% off the lifetime of your active subscription, visit itpro.tv/startup security and use the code SS30. Welcome everyone to Startup Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. This is episode 46. I'm very excited to be here with my illustrious co-host, Mr. Michael Santarcangelo. Still rocking the beach bum.
Illustrious. Does that mean I have to have luster?
Yes.
Do I have luster?
Definitely don't lackluster. Not lackluster.
Yeah. I am not lackluster. Okay. Wow. We're on a roll. We take a week off and look what happens to us.
That's it.
We bring it all together.
So
it's Black Shirt Day here,
it is Black Shirt Day.
I like a lot. Yeah.
It definitely is. A quick announcement before we get into it. IT Pro TV's courses now include Computer Hacking Forensic Investigator V9, Kali Linux, CompTIA A+ 901, and Accelerated CompTIA Security Plus. Premium annual memberships include all video content, in addition to access to virtual labs and Q&A forums. For a limited time, get 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription using the code SS30. That's right. I'm excited. Michael, I don't know where in the show we want to work this in, but I'll just give like a teaser. Have you guys ever heard of a company called Fox 40? They make a whistle.
No.
By far the most compelling, one of the most compelling stories I've ever heard about a startup, and highlights so many of the lessons, mostly, Michael, that you've instilled on me and our listeners. And I just think it's a great example. So I want to talk about that at some point.
I love that. I love your stories. It's good.
Yeah. So we have James Jardine with us. James has a career mostly as a software developer, software security experience. He's worked for various places in the financial industry, as well as having trained at DerbyCon, Black Hat, InfoSec World, Hacker Halted, and others, and is the author and instructor, or previously the author and instructor at the SANS Institute, where he taught secure coding in .NET. James and I have known each other for quite some time now. Our paths have crossed many times, many mutual friends. Michael, I don't know how you know James, probably very similar, just being in the security community.
Yeah, we're not allowed to talk about that anymore.
There was that one time.
That one time.
Yeah,
yeah. No, it's, if you know the story, it's good. If not, I can't tell you about it.
I still have a scar on my ankle. It's fine. So, James, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, James, Michael, I don't know where you wanted to start, but I kind of wanted to hear, I guess, from James and learn about how you came to create your own business, what led to that decision, because it is very much a startup business, branching off on your own. And before we start, I have a quote, because James is a consultant. and I have my consulting. Thank you, Tim Krayback at it was ShmooCon 2 or 3. Gave me this and said it says consulting, and then it says the quote is, "If you're not part of the solution, there's good money to be made in prolonging the problem." So, James, please tell us.
I feel like you expect that I'm prolonging the problem here, which is not the case. I've always wanted to do my own thing. I started off doing development, as you mentioned. And, getting into the security side, I saw the need for security, especially around application security. And we have a lot of people that come from network side, but we don't have a lot of people that come from application side and understand application development and the processes behind it, the languages behind it. So, having done consulting in the past where I was doing things like, Wi-Fi testing, physical testing, network testing, I wanted to reach out and say, look, I'm just going to focus on AppSec. And I'm not going to focus on all those other things because I want to be great at something, not okay at everything in that regards. And we need more people that were focused on application security. So I broke out and started, reaching out to companies, clients, trying to, push the idea of, hey, let's start working on building application security into your programs. And one of the biggest things I focus on is breaking down barriers and breaking down those silos that we see everywhere. This is an everybody problem, and we need the AppSec team and the application development teams working together to help actually provide application security. So I come in and help focus on how can we get the app team actually doing security stuff to help build that into their processes.
No, that's fantastic. So is it specific languages that you consult on, or is it just the overall process, or kind of a mixture?
It is a mixture. I mean, I come from a .NET background, so I definitely get more in-depth when you talk technically speaking for .NET. I've got a lot of information in how .NET works. As you mentioned, I used to teach for SANS, teaching the secure coding in .NET course. So when we're talking about source code analysis and doing actual code reviews, I limit that actually to only doing .NET because that's the language I really understand. When it comes to processes, the language doesn't matter. It's much more focused on, I want to help you understand what you can be doing in your SDLC to help make sure that you've got security embedded in there. And a lot of that stuff developers can be doing, QA can be doing. I focus a lot on trying to get those groups involved. I want business analysts, thinking about security. I want developers, QA, project managers, everybody thinking about how can we get security involved in our everyday processes so it's not siloed out.
One of the major, I believe, security developments comes with DevOps. And I also think largely what I've learned recently, I think a huge extension to that is containers and using something like Docker as part of your SDLC, as part of pushing your code through QA into production, from development. How much of that are you incorporating in your consulting today, James?
It just depends really a lot of what the clients are using, whether they're using DevOps already or not. And that's a matter of just being able to say, okay, what are you currently doing? Because I'm not walking in trying to say, hey, you should be doing DevOps, you should be doing Agile, you should be doing X. It's what are you currently doing and how can we improve that process to make it so you're doing security within it, right? It doesn't really matter what process you're doing as long as you're doing secure fundamentals and you're keeping things legit as you're going through it, then you're going to have a secure program. So if you're using DevOps, then, working with clients and saying, okay, how can we drop into that pipeline and, have within your continuous integration, maybe doing things like static analysis or other checkpoints. If you're using a lot of virtualization, if you're using a lot of Dockers or containers to be able to pass around, that's great. But, what are the risks around that? How are you protecting that process? Because when we're talking about just moving containers from environment to environment, there's risk there as well. Because who's moving those? What do we know about those? How are they built up? What's the security of the container? So we have to consider all that stuff. But overall, it's not necessarily a DevOps thing. It's not an Agile thing. It's everything together. And what are you doing and how can we fit that in? Because trying to force too much change within an organization just isn't going to work. I mean, we see that when we walk in there and say, hey, you're going to use XYZ static analysis tool, or you're going to use this tool. How successful those programs typically instead of going in and saying, okay, what are you using for development? How are you developing? Now, what tools integrate with that? So I'm not taking you out of your environment. I'm actually keeping you right in what you're doing, and we're just adding in additional checks.
Is that would you view as one of your differentiators, James? It kind of sounds like that was the problem you're trying to solve, is the entire approach to securing a software program wasn't as encompassing as it should be.
Well, what I found was, in previous, lifetimes, we come in, we test, we give you a report, we were gone. There is no advancing the program. There's no getting into, hey, what's really going on here? It's, hey, I'm going to test your app. I'm going to give you a report. I'm gone. And what was lacking there is, oftentimes we hand that report to the security group. Maybe the security group hands that report to the developers. Oftentimes I find that the security group doesn't even hand them the report. They just get a couple bugs and they pass them in either through a system of some sort, so the developers never get access to that. And so what I wanted to do was try to find a way that if I'm doing testing, then how can we make that more collaborative and the developers actually more involved, QA's more involved, they can learn from the experience. If I'm going to spend this much money to have a test, how can I expand that so you're getting much more than just a report back? Maybe you're getting some training involved with that of, hey, let me show you how I found some of this or why I found this type of finding. But then again, also saying, okay, look, we found a cause for this. This is throughout your entire system, you're doing X. Now let me teach you why that is a problem and how you can go about finding it again, maybe automating it in your current QA processes and remediating it. So it's really about starting with, testing, but also going in and looking at the program as a whole and not just coming in and saying, okay, I'm just going to focus on threat modeling or I'm just going to focus on testing. It's, I want to see what you're doing, and I want to see how we can look at that and improve the security practices with the most efficiency and the least friction being involved.
Michael, I don't want to hog all the question time.
Well, I mean, he said friction, so I always like that. I mean, one of the things that I always liked too is that James and I have had this conversation a lot. And James, you often talked about, look, there's an established testing budget. And it's big, and it's bigger sometimes than a security budget. Why don't we let them do some of the security, or why don't we integrate it at some of those different places and then kind of close that loop? So I've always been taken with your approach too, to say, here, not just I found it. Let's go look at your code. Let's talk about it. Let's see what learns. It kind of brings everybody into it. So I'm kind of curious then, when you're going into organizations, do you find that your first point of contact is the security team? And then they bring you to the developers and they see you as one of yours, so it's okay? Or are you going on more of the development side, or are you still trying to figure that out? Like, does everybody love James, or are you trying to map out a better way to get the love going? Go ahead and answer. I'm going to stop.
No, it's asking. A great question, because it's one of the challenges I face. When I first started out, my idea was that I was going to go out to development teams, work with developers. I go to more development type conferences now versus focusing on security conferences, looking at that type of stuff and think, oh yeah, I get on the development teams, I'm going to do this. And I found out that that's a high wall to get over. So in reality, mostly I'm brought in through security teams. And then, we try to merge that over into, all right, let's work more with the development team and let's get them involved. So there's still kind of that middleman there. Ideally, I would rather be the development teams bring it in, because then it shows a few things. It shows that they're dedicated and they're taking it as part of their responsibility and saying, hey, we need to bring somebody in to help us do this and get this going. I don't need another group forcing this upon me. I just want to bring it in and we're going to get this done, right? Like, we're going to do it our way. And it's much easier to do it your way when you're bringing the people in. But it does make it difficult, because we're still at this idea that security is security's problem and not development or QA or the application team in the whole, that it's their issue, right? So they still don't really have ways to allocate budget for that type of thing. So there's lots of hurdles to get in that route. But I do a lot of engaging at the development level, but typically I'm being brought in still through security and then kind of merged over. But it's definitely an interesting dilemma. And as you talked about, trying to get QA involved. And I'll give you an example. I had a client, I was talking to him, and we were talking about, they had a 5-person internal red team. And I'll tell you that, I don't know the red team personally, but I know that they're not all application people, right? They're probably network people, not all application focused. They got 5 people on the red team. And I was like, well, how many people do you have in QA? And it was a little over 200 people that resided in the QA role. And I was like, why would you not be teaching QA how to find a bunch of this stuff? Because when we think about testing for security, we've got automation, lots of scanners that can do stuff, which those people could also review the results of. But a lot of the things that we find even manually aren't really that difficult to find. Well, we could teach somebody to find that. I mean, we've got videos of people teaching, 9-year-olds or even younger how to run, some of these automated scans to find SQL injection. We could teach people how to do that, but, you lose a couple people out of 200, it's not that bad. You lose 1 out of 5, that's a big hit to your resources. And it ties directly into something I try to work with people about is this whole hiring thing, and I put out an article. I know, Michael, we talked about this a while back, talking about hiring for AppSec. And I talk to clients all the time about it because they're looking for this, unicorn that can do everything under the sun, when really what they need is somebody to be able to, be the middleman between vendors and, take the findings from one and put them in another system and send reports out. I don't need a pen tester for that. I don't need somebody that's in-depth knowledge of the language that we're using for that. But it's a matter of being able to come down and say, what do I really want? Because I'm putting out jobs for AppSec people, but I don't really need an AppSec person. I need XYZ. I need a business analyst. I need a project manager. I don't need this. So working with people to try to understand within your group, within your resources, what do you currently have and how can we use those to actually make your system better?
James, I want to go back to where you talked about integrating security processes into QA. It seems to me that that's a problem we have in the industry today, that many organizations with a software development process have a QA department. However, they're not enabled to do many of the security tasks that are either not being done or, like you're pointing out, being done by somewhat the wrong people or an understaffed team. So, two questions. Why is it that more people don't put a security focus on their QA team? And what are some tips that you have? What do you recommend that people do to get those processes integrated?
Well, I think, first, I think a lot of people see it as a big time constraint, for their QA team. But the other side of that is we sell it as security is too hard for them to understand, right? It's the same thing me selling you that, home users can't update the firmware on their routers these days. You just log into the web interface and you can do it, right? I mean, but we sell it as, it's too difficult. You have to have a security mindset. You have to be born with some special superhuman powers that culminate around security. But that's not realistic, right? I mean, like I said, a lot of this stuff can be taught. And, I think a lot of people just kind of fear it. But I'm seeing more QA groups starting to get more involved. The difference you have to think about, though, is that a lot of QA groups, to me, there's 2 different types of QA. You have the QA that are not very technical. They are very Excel driven. You give them a script, they walk down through it, right? Go to this URL, click this link. If this box appears, it passes. If it doesn't, it fails. Very step-by-step oriented, which a lot of that work, in the right organizations, it starts to get automated and gets automated out. Then you've got the more technical side of QA where you've got people that are, truly engineers about it, where they're writing scripts, they're doing automation, they're doing a lot more stuff around building this stuff out, but they have a lot more technical know-how, and it's easier for them to grasp some of these concepts to go in and say, I go in and tell people, look, if anything, your QA group should be running proxies. I don't see any reason why you're not running a proxy in there, because if you look at applications today, web applications, mobile applications, right, there's so much more traffic going back and forth in that app than what you see on the URL, right? I hit one URL and there are 50 transactions plus that actually occur behind the scenes, but people aren't looking at those, right? If QA is not using a proxy, how are they seeing that? They're seeing what you see in the UI. And you take examples like information leakage, where I'm going to return back a JSON object through an API call that has, full social security numbers or account numbers, and then on the screen it masks a portion of it. That's so easy to find if you're actually using a proxy to look for it. But if you're not going to see it. But I think the biggest hesitation is people fear that security is supposed to be something else. It's supposed to be another group. There's other people that are specialized in that. And the reality is that we can go into a QA group and we can start teaching them how to do these things. Now, I'm not saying we're going to teach them how to find, the most complex blind SQL injection, exploiting crazy stuff, pivoting across servers. But that's why you have your red team. That's why you have other mechanisms to find those type of vulnerabilities. But to me, if you're getting hit with a SQL injection because somebody put a single quote into a text box and that made it into production past QA, like that's a big failure there, and that we should have been able to catch that, right? There's a level to which we need to catch. So starting groups off and saying, all right, let's start them off. I started doing with some clients where we teach, hey, here's an introduction to what a proxy is. Here's how we start using the proxy. And we start them off using it, but they're not really doing anything with it, right? I just want you to get comfortable with the proxy. Then let's start looking at some of the things. Let's start understanding the request and the response that comes back. Let's start looking at certain vulnerabilities and identify how can we now start identifying some of these to an acceptable level to where we can start picking some of these off. But it's a gradual process. Your QA team's not going to turn into a security team overnight. And my goal is never to turn everybody into a security person. I'm not here to turn you into a security person.
It's a great starting point, James. And you're reminding me of when I got my first development job. They were like, yeah, before you can write any code in development, like you got to spend 6 months in QA. And every programmer that started had to spend, I don't forget what the time was, like something like 6 months in QA, because that got you in tune with what the application does, how it works, and even allowed you to write some scripts so that other more senior programmers could evaluate your code. I think it's also a great thing for security people to get started in QA, because you get to the same things, right? You have to understand how the application works before you can understand why, when I put a single quote in that string, does it trigger SQL injection. You have to understand how an entire application stack works that integrates with a database before you can understand how SQL injection works and what the ramifications are.
Well, I talk about that. I talked last year at DerbyCon about, increasing the value of pen testing and take it to the next level. And, one of the points that I bring out is that, if you're on the security side, you should be doing just as much learning as what we expect the application side is doing. You watch on Twitter, you hear in social media all the time, people talking about, oh, developers don't know how to do this. They don't do this. We talk about the echo chambers and, developers aren't at security conferences and vice versa. But I would tell you, going and sitting at a developer conference and, sitting in a class on Meteor or AngularJS or all these new technologies coming out, I don't know how, from a testing side, we expect that we're going to be great at it if we're not starting to understand these technologies. And so I tell people, when I say, look, you've got a red team, use your red team to help mentor QA, and vice versa. It was said, I think 2 years ago at DerbyCon, there was a panel talking about pen testing. And, I've said it for years leading up to that pen testing is QA, right? Like what we are doing is quality assurance. We're testing the application for bugs. And we keep trying to recreate this wheel of this is how we should test. And yet QA's been around for a long time. We know how to test, right? We've got testing methodologies down. We've got applications that help automate testing. And yet, if you go to the security side, we don't want any of it, right? It's like that doesn't exist. It's a black box. And we want to create all our own new stuff, all our own new tools. We want to create our own new methodologies, everything around how we test an application. Yet, we already test. We know what testing is. And that's why I love QA when we talk about the testing side, because that's what they do. They test. We have people that come out with degrees that focus on software testing. And we need to start leveraging that to be able to bring that across and start using that as we're testing and creating that collaboration. Because I think we can learn as much from them as they can learn from us, and it turns now from it's not an us and them. It's, hey, my approach to security is we're all here to support the company. I'm here to help support you in creating applications that are secure, that are quality, that the business is successful. I'm not here to hype up stuff that isn't a priority. I'm not here to, slow your day down or try to make your work harder. It's how can I help you get better at making secure applications, whether that's understanding your frameworks, implementing tools, controls, without being a burden on what you're currently doing. So we're not slowing down development.
Michael, more questions for James?
Well, a lot of the things that our listeners talk to, and I'm going to pivot the direction a little bit, is, okay, so what's it like? What's it like stepping out? What's it like taking that leap and doing it? And should they do it or not? And, what I like, James, is that you're blending writing with education, with consulting services, with still doing the work for people. Like you've got kind of a neat model. So somebody else looking at this, what would you do different? What would you do the same? What should they think about striking out on your own?
I think biggest thing for striking out is trying to really get a good grasp of what it is you're trying to do, which I think is still something that I'm still massaging around a little bit of trying to really figure out what's the best focus here. And I will tell you that, I've been out on my own for about a year now. I've learned so much as I go through this of things that, are working a little bit, things that are not working. And you're going to get that, right? You have to have some flexibility around what you're doing, because if you don't, right, you got to be able to move with the market. So you see things, right? Like I try not to focus strictly on testing. As a matter of fact, pen testing is not my main focus of my business. I do it, right? But it's usually because it's a tie-in with the other stuff. So for other people to come out, one, understand what you're doing. Understand that if you're just going to come out and do something like pen testing, there are a lot of places that do pen testing, right? Man, pen testing is everywhere. So, making that jump and trying to find clients and know that you're, going up against well-established organizations. The hardest part to me as I'm going through this, the biggest challenge is trying to get out in front of people. How do you get those introductions to people you don't already know to where they'll actually sit down and listen to what you're saying? Because you might have a great thing that you've got, right? I mean, I feel like I've got a pretty good idea of how we can make software security better. But the hard part is finding the right people to get in touch with. And even when you can identify those people, actually getting that introduction and getting through that. And I will tell you, running your own business, I mean, it's stressful. I mean, I was terrified, and I kept waiting and waiting. Like, when am I going to feel comfortable going out on my own? And, when I did it, I made sure that I had a good bit saved up. So, if nothing happens at all for a year, I'm okay. I don't want it to not happen for a year. But, it's, you're never going to feel 100% comfortable going out, but if you feel like that's something you can do, I mean, you have to be able to talk to people. If you're somebody that can't work with people, going out on your own, definitely not a thing. I will also say that I feel, having somebody else with you is a huge thing. Going out on your own, I'm solo. Going out on your own is difficult, right? Because you have nobody to bounce ideas off of. You have nobody to, talk through, what are we doing? What do you think about this? It's more of okay, yeah, this looks like where we have it. And this is what I see when I'm at a client. So what processes could we do to help improve that? But, having somebody to collaborate with, I think makes a huge difference and helps relieve some of that stress. But on the other side, if you're doing this straight out of your own pocket, that can be difficult to do. But, just understand what it is you're trying to do, and you just got to go for it. Fortunately for me, my wife's very supportive of it. She told me, as long as the kids keep going to the school they're going to, and we live in the house we're in, go for it. Yeah. So I've got limits, but anybody going out to do it takes building up clients, having some stuff set up ahead of time and being prepared for those clients that don't come back, or, the struggle of trying to get new clients and getting yourself out there. There's a lot that you have to do, and it encompasses more than your know-how, right? You may be great at application security, but are you good at marketing? Are you good at sales? Are you good at the contractual side of, we have to do MSAs, we have to do NDAs, we have to do SOWs, all that stuff. And, getting comfortable with that, it's a lot, right? And I hate for that to sound like, oh man, if somebody's thinking about it, don't do it. To me, it's worth it. I mean, I'll tell you, my kids are off for the summer. I spend a lot of time with my family during the summer because I have flexibility in what I do. But there's also stresses that come with that. So,
no, it's very, very well put. I think Michael and I are both nodding in agreement.
Yeah, I was going to say,
balance.
well said.
Yep. Well, James,
how much of it surprised you? I'm sorry, I know we're out of time, but how much of it surprised you? I mean, I've known you for a while. You knew some of this going into it, but how much of it did you properly anticipate before you got into it? And how much of it, now that you're in the middle of it, you're like, okay, now I know it. And I kind of any big surprises then in the last year?
I mean, I don't know about big surprises. Definitely things have changed, right? When I went out on my own, I had a specific set of, this is how I was going to approach this. This was going to be the golden ticket. People are going to love this. And it didn't work out quite like that. It's not far off, but there was modifications, I mean, definitely learning curves. I mean, going out, I mean, lots of things to consider, right? Not only what services are you providing, but also one of the most difficult things I think is, pricing for those, right? How much are you charging for these services, especially since not a lot of other people are doing this stuff, and there's a big challenge there that, people are saying they're doing stuff similar, that charge very, very little. I mean, you've got other people that do it and charge a lot more. It's just figuring out pricing, but really it's being adaptable. I've changed a lot of direction I went into, stuff that I thought I would have done 6 months ago is now swinging back around on my plate to, all right, no, I really got to get this done because this really is where I need to do it. There's a lot of hopping around of, oh no, this is good. No, this is good. Oh, I see somebody needs this. And you get caught with that. And sometimes it's really difficult to narrow down and say, I'm going to finish this and then I'll move on because everything seems like a great opportunity. And, there's lots of challenges and lots of spaces. If you're doing trainings, if you're doing, pen testing, all this stuff, there's lots of other people that are already doing it. So that is where you see, I found a lot of the change, I think, is I had a lot of ideas of how I could make stuff better. And one of the biggest challenges I've run into is people are very well ingrained into the current way things are done. And so trying to sway that boat and say, look, and I know we do it this way, but if we tweak it this way, I think we're going to get a lot more value out of this for you. And you'll be a lot better off. And we're slowly moving to that, but it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, and then that's a common struggle, I think, for a lot of organizations, and certainly many that we've had on this show, and certainly for Michael and I in our various endeavors. So, yeah, that's awesome. Well, James, thank you very much for appearing on Startup Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it. It's been a while since I've been on one of your shows, Paul. So.
Yes, it was overdue, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Back.
Thanks, James.
All right.
With that, we're going to take a short break, come back, talk about some startup articles. Stay tuned.